Welcome to the Business and Marketing Podcast That Makes Sense, the podcast dedicated to helping owners and founders gain clarity, untangle complexity, and eliminate the guesswork in running their business.
In each episode, we'll dive into business messaging and methods, clearing the unclear and turning confusion into specific, actionable solutions. We'll tackle and make sense of the challenges we all face, offering insights and strategies from right alongside you.
Our goal is to empower you to be the SenseMaker, giving you the tools to accelerate your business with clarity and confidence. If you found your way here, there's a good chance that you want to learn more about SenseMaker, about who we are, what SenseMaker is, and how it came to be. And a big part of what I do with my clients in Message Clarifier is I encourage them that we need to understand where they've been before we can understand where they're going and who they're going to be serving and how they can best communicate that with their audience. And so with that in mind, we're going to flip things around a little bit today, and I'm actually going to interview Dario and unpack his journey, unpack what brought him to this point and what made SenseMaker what it is today. So good morning, Dario.
Morning, Brad. It's good to have this conversation. Thanks for, I feel like saying thanks for having me along, but this is our podcast. So
let's kick things off a little bit and give us some background into the formation of SenseMaker. What did the early days look like? How did it start, and what led you to that point of starting the business?
I've always had a mind for systems and a systematic approach. It's the way I work. It's my natural, if you think about my natural hardwired way of responding to what's going on around me, I'll always, if I'm under pressure, back up into a systematic approach. And we'd arrived in this country many years ago, and I was required to generate an income in order to keep us all going, and had employment, but needed to do the exams that would qualify me to offer financial advice in the country. While I was doing those exams, I obviously couldn't give advice, and so I spent time with the IFA with whom I was working, and was interested one day to see his administrator, his clerk, looking for a file that started with the letter A. The name started with the letter A. And this fellow, who was the gangliest, loveliest human being you could imagine, was on his hands and knees at the filing cabinet, about 4 filing cabinets down in a line of 8 in the bottom drawer. And I stood at the door waiting for the file to come out and thought, that's a lot of A's. 4 filing cabinets, bottom drawer. That's a lot of people with A's. So I said to him, that's a lot of A's to be finding this file down there. And he said to me, oh, no, they're not a lot of A's. I said, oh, right. What's going on here then? He said, well, this is just a space I found to put this file. So I said, oh, interesting. Are they in alphabetical order? Oh, no, definitely not. So how do you find them? I remember where I put them, he said. And if you're not here, well, then no one does anything. They wait for me to come back, and then I'll get the files for them. So I went through to Dennis's office, who was the fellow I was working with, who was just a quintessential Englishman, used to call me Mr. B, and said to him, Dennis, I've figured out a way to generate an income here. If I get you organized, will you pay me half the difference between what you're earning now and what you're going to earn when you're organized? And he said, why, Mr. B, that sounds like a cracking idea. And I got him organized, and he'd never worked that hard in 20 years in the industry, and suddenly made a huge amount of money and paid me half the difference. And that's how I supported us. I in the end gave up any plan to get into life insurance sales in this country, and stuck with sense making. And so that was the idea was born there. And I thought, yeah, we can do something with this. So that's where the seed happened.
So that's interesting. And obviously for me, being on the inside, I know some of the answers to this, and I'm aware of some of the story and the journey. But the name SenseMaker and the idea of sense making, you say, kind of was born there. Is that something that you were aware of at the time, or is that something that developed and you grew into? How did that come about? Because very often people will look at the name SenseMaker or the idea of sense making and say, literally, as the name of this podcast is, that makes sense. But I'm aware that the road to that point is never a straight line, is never a flat sort of plane. What was that like, and how did you arrive at that name?
Well, I went on something of a journey then, trying different things, and as any entrepreneur would, spend time with my brother-in-law, recording everything I ever learned about selling And he sat in those days with a computer, literally cutting and pasting the printed word into some sort of a workbook because I was going to try and train sales. And that idea didn't work. And so I went through the usual entrepreneur's creative process of looking for a way to express this germinating seed that had been planted in my mind. And I followed a little course, a journey for a while, and got involved in some other pastimes. But one day I was at a birthday party with Josh, your brother, my youngest son, for those of you who don't know us. And I sat next to a lady called Gina Paniotti, who owned a sandwich round. And she said to me, she was telling me about her business, and we sat chatting, and all the kids were playing, and Sue was bored to tears because she's not excited about business at all. And I was asking Gina questions, and she was giving me answers, and it just didn't make sense. And I'd say, why? Could you tell me why you're doing that? And she'd tell me this is why. And I'd say, have you thought about trying this? And so the conversation progressed, and Sue invited her around and said, why don't you come and have a meeting together and just work this idea out? So it turned into a situation where Gina would come to our home from time to time. And I started working with her on understanding her business. And she suddenly started making money, quite astoundingly. There was no one more shocked than me, to be honest. And one day she arrived at our home with a check, having asked me to give her an invoice for some time, and me saying no, because it felt like, how could I give her an invoice for something that was so easy? She arrived with a check and said, I can't take this from you anymore without paying you, because I'm just seeing so much growth happen. And so I need you to give me an invoice. And she became my first paying client. And the idea for SenseMaker was born. And at that stage, in its first early iterations, it was Pacer. And that was born out of a life experience and really captures the spirit of what we do. And maybe I can explain that to you in a moment. But I went to Business Link to a lady called Sharon Davies to show her my idea. I'd made Gina a little report of the work we'd done. And I thought, well, let me go and show Business Link this and see if they can give me any advice or ideas. And Sharon Davies said, oh, wow, that's amazing. You should make that into a product. And I walked home from Sharon's office and got home and thought my car had been stolen, and then realized that I'd actually driven down into the town and had to walk back and fetch it. But the idea was born, then started to develop, and the phone rang one day and someone said to me, hi, this is so-and-so. Is that Dario? I said, yes, it is. And they said, I've been referred to you. I said, by who? She said, Sharon Davies. I said, oh, right. What have you been referred for? She said, you're going to help me get organized. I said, I am. She said, yes, you are. I said, well, that's brilliant. Let's meet up then. And I showed her my little report that I'd made, Gina. And she said, wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I'll sign up for that. What do you charge? And I said, well, I need to think about that, and give you time to think about this. And we can chat to each other
Secretly
about
buying yourself time.
Yeah, well, I didn't have a diary. I didn't have invoices. I didn't know how I was going to coach this, but it was in me, and so we started. And I used to practice on you in the mornings, if you remember, and say, "This is what I'm going to do today" in my calls. And I'd practice on you, and we'd work on it together. And then I'd do it in the call, and it would work, and the results were amazing. So it slowly kind of grew out of that into something that was quite incredible, because people used to travel from all over Southeast England to my dining room to sit at the table with my Jack Russell at my feet and be helped to make sense of their business.
And for those of you that don't know me, I've been involved with this journey from pretty early on. I think I even recently saw that original book that you were talking about, that your brother-in-law, my uncle, helped put together. I think you've still got that, if I'm not mistaken. And I think something that you said there resonated with me and the experience that I've had in entrepreneurship. And I think that so many others would have in entrepreneurship. And that's the idea that when Gina arrived with that check and wanted to pay you for how you had helped her, it can feel almost fraudulent to accept money for something like that, especially when you've created a service or a product from scratch and from nothing, because it feels so easy to you and you do it naturally. It can feel like you're taking advantage of somebody when you're charging for that.
Yeah.
Something that I often explain to people, because it comes up a lot, is we hold in our minds an idea of who we want to become, and often we have an image of somebody who we aspire to be like.
Yes.
But what we don't realize is that that positioning between us and where we want to be is relative, and it's always moving away from us and we're always moving towards it. And so we never feel like we're as good as we need to be able
Yes.
to start charging for what we want. And what I encourage people to do is to stop, yes, have those aspirations, but look back at where you've come from and unpack the value that is in the journey that you've been on, and the
Yeah.
value that you've got that is intrinsic to who you are as a person. Like you say,
Yeah.
systems have always been something that's kind of just found its way out with you. And so I wanted to encourage anyone that's listening that's maybe felt like that or feeling like that to dig into what's got them to where they are and unpack that value and help the people who are stuck where they once were. There's something that I wanted to unpack a little bit more. Well, a couple of things actually. First, before I go into the pacer idea that you talked about, can you describe for us in a term, if you can, what is sense making? What does sense making mean to you and us as a business? And just unpack that for anybody that's listening to help them understand.
I'll tell you what it is. For years, I'd sat in training sessions and classrooms and been admonished by teachers and that I needed to become something. I needed to be better, or I needed to be like my brother, or I needed to be like this student or that student, or I needed to be, and I always needed to be something, and I needed to learn something, and I needed to understand something. But no one ever helped me to unpack it into a format that I could understand and work with. And for me, that's what making sense is. I think making sense is unique to each individual. And that's where SenseMaker is so powerful, because it's not telling anyone anything, it's helping them make sense. It's a methodology that leads you down a road that you will eventually make sense of what you've got. And I think that's what was meaningful for me, was just the sense of finding out a way of unpacking what was in my head and getting it written down, and then, like combing spaghetti, get it into order so that I could see it in order, and then put it together in a way that I could work with it. Sense making. And so when people ask me what I do, I tell them I sense make, because that's what it is. It's combing spaghetti, if you like. It's, sorting out your alphabet pasta and making words. It's unpacking stuff that you can't get your head around and putting it together in a way that you can.
That's exactly that last bit is I was going to kind of summarize with that, in the sense that that fuzzy, ambiguous, unclear feeling that you get in your brain where it's sort of tense and frustrated, and you know you need to move forward, but you don't know how to move forward.
You feel overwhelmed.
It's the unpacking and clearing up of that. And it's actually something that we like to say is making meaning from the mess. So that confusion that's in your head is actually all the material that you need to make sense and create something useful for yourself to carry on with. And yeah, it's a really good example.
Yeah.
From my perspective, it's been really interesting to see the progression of what is now SenseMaker. For those that don't know, it started off as Manor House Consulting, and SenseMaker is a trading name of ours now. And way back, my personal journey has been in digital marketing, digital design, and websites and whatnot from a very young age. And so I've always been involved from the sidelines very early on in my attempt to communicate what is this business and to get that point across. And getting clear on what that point that we want to make has always been a challenge for us, until actually very recently we've started really sort of taking ground on that and making progress. And something that I recognize when I think of the name SenseMaker and how we've shifted to that from Manor House Consulting is this idea that when the business started, consultant, consulting, coach, that kind of language felt like the best fit label. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
But you're always aware, and I know other business owners that have felt the same way in their own space, always aware that that felt like the right label. It's not the best fit label. And so this transition to the idea of SenseMaker and sense making has been a progression over the last 21 years.
Yeah.
This podcast is a celebration of our 21st year. It's been a progression to SenseMaker and a journey, and something that you often talk about is a learning spiral. And so often, if I go back to the analogy of us aspiring to be like a certain type of person or a certain way, we look at that and we think it's a straight line and can get disappointed when we realize it's not. And you always are talking about this learning spiral, where if we imagine a spiral and we're on the inside of that spiral working our way outwards, we actually might go past the same point a few times, but each time our perspective has shifted slightly and our understanding of what we're doing has shifted slightly. And so we need to be open to that. We need to almost relax into the idea that it is progressive in a circular fashion rather than a direct linear fashion. It gives us space to get things wrong and to learn from mistakes, but also helps us to be open to new ideas that might come up along the way. And really, I think that explains your journey to this idea of SenseMaker and sense making. Would you agree?
Yeah. I was trying to repair our vacuum cleaner the other day. It was making all the right noises, but getting none of the expected results. And Josh stood with the now emptied vacuum cleaner and said, "Watch, I'm vacuuming for ages and there's nothing happening. It's not picking up anything, and we can see it needs to pick up stuff, but it's not." So in my wisdom, I determined that there must be a blockage. And I'm not very handy with this kind of thing. But I used a spoon as a screwdriver to undo the catches on the bottom of the vacuum cleaner. And I found said blockage and we rectified that. And Josh made the point that he'd never seen a spoon used as a screwdriver before. And I said to him, well, that's part of being an entrepreneur. You kind of use what you can to do what you can with what you've got. And I think a lot of the journey is about that. It's about doing what I can with what I've got in my hand, making it work. And very often I look back and it looks like I had a plan. But when I'm moving forward, what I'm doing is solving problems. I think it's Holiday that says in the obstacle is the way, that the obstacle is the way. What's blocking my way that's where I need to go, solve that problem, and that will lead me to my next blockage, which will be my next step in my strategy. And sometimes you just got to start with a spoon. So you can figure out that actually what you need is a screwdriver or a more suitable tool, and allow yourself the freedom to be able to grow your thought process and what you do in that way.
Yeah, and that book reference, Ryan Holiday, "The Obstacle is the Way." I think it's him, isn't it?
Yes.
For me, is a good summation of what sense making is. In if you flip that over, it's the way that you overcome those obstacles. For me, is through good questioning.
Yes.
Right. So, what are the best questions I can ask at the moment as it relates to this problem or blockage that I'm trying to get past? And how can I start to unpick that? And for me, with sense making, everything starts with the questions. And I really enjoyed that. And the idea of using what you've got at the time to accomplish or get as close to the desired result that you want, which kind of leads us nicely onto a quick explanation of what you meant earlier by pacer, where that name comes from. What does it mean? Is it pacer? Is that something someone has on their heart? What is that? And what's the story behind that? And how does that story influence what we know as SenseMaker today?
Well, I was a rather rotund average South African in 1988, lying in my bed eating full English breakfasts and assortment of snacks that Susan kindly generated for me, whilst she kept you and your sister out of the way, and I watched the Comrades Marathon, which is a big marathon in South Africa.
Ultra marathon.
Ultra marathon, yeah.
81 Ks?
89, I think.
89 Ks.
90 Ks.
Okay, it's far.
Yeah, it's far. And I'd never been an athlete in my life, really. I'd run badly and generally quite slowly. I don't think I'd ever won a running race in my life or come close to it. I was generally the sweeper upper at the back that picked up the alien and helped him across the line. But I lay in my bed eating breakfast and saw Wally Hayward, who was the oldest man in history, I believe, to run and finish an ultramarathon, cross the finish line of the Comrades Marathon. And I said to Sue, if Wally Hayward can do it, I can do it. I'm running them Comrades Marathon next year. And she was horrified, as she usually is at most of my ideas. And I said about training for Comrades, and I'd never done this before. And I connected with one of my dad's friends, who was in his 60s at the time, Dennis Shepherd, and Len Byrne, his friend, who had both run the Comrades on numerous occasions, and asked them to help me get to run it. and they both decided that they were going to test me out on this, and so they took me for a very, very long run. And when I finished it standing up, they said I had what it took. They'd help me. And so the following 9 months, I'd injured myself. In fact, at the beginning of my 12-month training period, it took me 3 months to recover from my first run.
Mhm.
And anyway, they started training me and with me, and I ran my first 10 kilometers, 15, 21, 32, and then it started getting into the bigger league. I ran a couple of ultra marathons, the Corky Marathon in from Pretoria to Joburg, and another one in Sasolburg in Old Orange Free State, as it was known at the time. And long story short, I was ready to run the comrades on the day, and as ready as I'd ever be. And another long story short, I got to a point where I had terrible trouble with the wind in my. I'd kind of had a burp where some Coca-Cola had been trapped by some water gas, and I couldn't breathe, and it was a big disaster. And Len and Dennis, realizing that I was going to end up a casualty of the comrades, said that they'd meet me at the end at the hospital tent. And I determined that that was never going to happen. There was no ways that I was going to not finish this run. So my goal became to make the cutoff at every cutoff, which I did. And I got to the end. I'd been on the road for 10, going on 11 hours. And I got to the end, and there was a big banner over the motorway that said 5 kilometers to go, Coca-Cola banner. And I looked at that and I worked out my times and thought, I can do this. And then I ran for about 15 minutes or so and came to the actual marker that said 5 kilometers to go. And that just broke my heart. I was so tired. I couldn't think. And I stopped and stood in the middle of the road, staring blankly into space and wondering what was going to happen next. And a guy that I didn't know came beside me and said, "What's the matter?" Harriers, which is the club I was running with. I said to him, "I can't do this." He said, "You can. Come, I'll walk with you 50 paces and run with you 50 paces. We'll get you going again. And you can do this. I'll help you." And so he got alongside me and we walked 50 paces, ran 50 paces, and then came up to a refreshments table and he said, "You keep going, I'll get you a drink." And slowly I got my mojo back and got it back into the rhythm again. And he tootled off on his own again. And he ran the comrades every year. Crazy. And I came into Durban, and it was the most amazing experience of my life. The people were going crazy. It was getting to the end of the day. The cutoff was coming. It was all happening. And I remember seeing a group of people standing on top of the bus dancing and singing. And few people sing like the South Africans can sing. And it was just the most amazing experience. And I ran into the stadium, and the place was in an absolute uproar. It was coming down into the last minutes. The guy who'd started the race was standing on a podium with the starter pistol in his hand, ready to fire the closing shot to say that the 11 hours was up. And I saw this group of people in front of me, and I handed my way through this group, and they were all shouting at me, and I was thinking they're so impressed that I'm going so fast. And the stadium, I could hear chariots of fire in my head. You know, it was like one of those things where they show you, this is what you think you look like when you're running down the road, and then they show you another one,
Reality.
reality check, and it's well, in my mind's eye, I was just this powerful athlete going for the finish line, handing my way off through, getting everyone out of my way. And on the video, you can see me coming around the corner. The guy was about to lift the pistol, and I absolutely stormed the finish line with a few seconds to go. And Marshall stepped out to congratulate me and give me something. I don't know what it was. I couldn't stop. I ran straight into the man. His clipboard went flying. His stuff went flying. It was just a disaster. And I lay on the ground and thought, I'll just stay here for the rest of my life. And that's going to be fine. And when I was thinking about naming this idea that I'd created, I remembered the comrades.
Mm.
And I remembered the fact that I'd finished the run. Someone once said to me, I achieved nothing when I finished the comrades. I'd only come within about a minute or 27 seconds or whatever of embarrassing myself. But actually what I'd done was achieve a personal best. And a personal best is as good as a win. In fact, a personal best is a win. And it doesn't matter who you are or where you are, it's a win. The thing that got me to my personal best was a pacer. Someone who didn't know me, who didn't know my past, who didn't know my future. He had no interest personally in me finishing or not finishing. But he took an interest in me, and he got alongside me, and he just helped me to think, and he helped me to get going again, and he helped me to get to the end. And that's pacer. That's what I had in mind when I thought of an, excuse me, I'm getting emotional here. But that's what I had in mind when I thought of naming what we do. And that's the spirit of sense making, is that we want to be alongside people, not in front of them. I was saying to someone the other day, that Western shepherds lead their sheep from behind or drive the sheep, and Eastern shepherds lead their sheep from the front. They lead them. We don't want to do that. We want to be alongside.
Yeah.
And that's the heart of SenseMaker, and that's the heart of Pacer, is being alongside and helping people to think, helping them to unpack stuff, to make their unclears clear, to make sense of stuff, so that they can have something to work with and build something worthwhile.
And that is that. And I think that's a brilliant summary of it. And it perfectly articulates how sense making is different to coaching and consulting. And hopefully you can hear now the difference in the idea of SenseMaker and sense making. We're here to be alongside you. And so if you found that valuable today, even though it's just an introduction to who we are, if you think that this is the kind of thinking and company that you want to keep, we encourage you to connect with us on LinkedIn, write us an email, and we'll be back with our first episode.
Been good to talk to you, Brad.
Likewise.
And there endeth the lesson. If you found this episode helpful, why not complete the free assessment on our website at sensemaker.co.uk to uncover your unclears.
SenseMaker, your bridge between where you're stuck and your reason for starting.